So in terms of steps for building your CV, what I'm going to do is literally go down the CV and look at the different sections. Now, in general, it's a two-stage process, because when you're approaching the job market, you might have your CV up online somewhere and you have absolutely no idea who will be looking at that CV. So you'll have a general CV, and that could be for headhunters, that can be for online sites. And as I say, it's seen by different people. So what you need to do in these CVs is to reflect the general skills that most companies look for. And we'll go into what those skills are at a later slide. And then there's a second stage. So if you're applying for a specific job role, they're kind enough to tell you exactly what it is that they're looking for. So you need to make sure that CV is absolutely tailored to those needs. And this is a way of standing out as a candidate, because a lot of candidates are lazy, and what they do is that they end up sending the same CV to all companies. And if you really want to stand out and you want to increase your chances of being successful in that process, you need to tailor every CV to the positions that you apply to make sure that, whatever is asked for, there's 100% fit. So it's essentially a process of matching. On the one hand, you will have the company that is asking for certain requirements, and then you have the things that you can bring to the table. So you need to basically look at what those things are in terms of previous experience, the skills that they're looking for, maybe particular languages, and this is what you need to emphasize in terms of the information that you select to go in there. So in terms of the basics, personal data, it depends on how much experience you have. And students at IESE, for the full-time MBA program, might have an average of 4 years experience. People coming to more executive MBAs or to the executive programs are going to be people with a lot more experience. So in terms of IESE, for the full-time MBA, our format is 1 page. As I say, it needs to serve as an aperitif that will tickle the recruiter or the line manager that's looking at it, and it's an invitation to interview. When you've got a more experienced profile, clearly fitting everything on 1 page is a challenge, so going to 2 pages is absolutely fine. Again, I'm going to go to very basic details, but in terms of your name, whatever it is that you put there has to be consistent throughout the whole process. So if you tend to use your nickname, then use your nickname for the cover letter, for the CV, because if not, a variation in names might confuse recruiters. Now, in terms of the personal information that you put on your CV, you really need to adapt to local norms. And every country has its own criteria in terms of what they want to see on a CV or not. In the Anglo-Saxon world, and so we're talking United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, there's practically no personal data on a CV, and actually it's illegal to have it there. So you won't have a picture, you won't have your age, you won't have a marital status. These type of things are actually very, very normal in the more Latin world. So Southern Europe, even in Germany. In Germany, it's absolutely normal to put your picture and to put, the fact that you're married, how many kids you have, etc. So you need to take account of these variances in culture in terms of what information you put there, because in theory, a recruiter in the UK is not allowed to look at a CV that has this information on there, because they could be accused of discounting a candidate because they're too old, they're too young, they're too blonde, or whatever it is. No? So just keep that in mind at the time that you're applying for different job processes, because you really do need to adapt to local culture. Now, in terms of contact details, the traditional CV in the past included your address, your physical address. Now that's no longer necessary, but it does need to have contact details, so your email and whatever number they can locate you at. Now, what is very important worldwide now is that you really do need to include information on your work permit. Now, some people don't put any information at all, and then they get discounted at interviews phase, because they ask you, do you have a work permit to work in the EU? And you say, no. Well, I'm sorry, you're no longer a candidate. So it's actually much more efficient for you to put this information up front. Certain areas are very strict in terms of work permits. So, the EU, the United States, Brazil, they have very strict norms in terms of candidates from outside these places applying or not. So it's a pity, because you might be having to not apply to certain things, but I think it's very important to put this from the very beginning, because as I say, if they have this as a norm, they're going to discount you at a later stage, and it's a waste of time for you. Now, in terms of dates, the dates in a CV always go in reverse order. So you start with what you did last. So if you're currently working in a position, that's where you start, and then you work backwards. Now, whatever date format you use has to be uniform throughout. So if you're using months and years, always use months and years. If you're using just straight years, always use straight years. And this is important because visually it looks a lot cleaner. So whatever it is that you choose, just make sure that you choose always the same format. And then in terms of how much space you're dedicating to each work experience, so the general rule is dedicate the amount of space of the amount of time that you actually spent in that company. So if you spent 4 years in one company and then 2 years in another, then clearly, the amount of time that the amount of information that you put in the 2 years is going to be less than in the 4 years. In terms of education, for the full-time MBA CV, education goes right at the top underneath personal information. For a lot of the executive CVs, this section goes right at the end of the CV. Why? Because if you've got 7 to 15 years experience, a recruiter, the first thing that they're going to look at and give importance to is your work experience. What you did at university, 15 years ago is a lot less relevant to them, or even the MBA that you're so much investing in is less relevant to them than the work experience, your immediate work experience that you can bring to this new opportunity. So your education goes at the end. Now, in terms of what you should put in this educational section, at this point, just focus it purely on what you did in terms of undergrad and graduate degrees. All the courses that you might have taken, the extra things, etc., can go in a different section. In the full-time MBA would go in general information, and in the executive might go in additional courses. But just focus your education purely on what you did as an undergrad and what you did as a graduate. Now, in terms of how to define your university, we have students from over 70 different countries. So I would try to put, if you have to translate the name of your university, just translate it directly, or if you can also put the original name. In most large corporates have resources for finding out exactly what that university ranking was, etc. But don't get too creative in terms of what your university is. So it has to be something which they can very quickly identify. In terms of degree definition, the same thing. Just put exactly how your degree was defined. And so you can do a straight translation of what that degree is if it wasn't in the English language, for example. But don't get too creative in terms of what this degree means. Because again, companies have resources for understanding what a bachelor's is in Taiwan. So again, don't get too creative. In terms of final grades, again, state the original grades. Different countries have different standards for how they grade people at university level. So just put exactly what it was that you got. In the UK, they have a system of first, 2-1, 2-2, etc. Put that. In the United States, it's GPA. So again, put that and let the company that's receiving your CV make the translations themselves. Because if you try to make this comparison, that would mean X in the local country, you could be liable for seeing a bit of creative accounting, that you're putting much higher grades than actually what they would define as the grade. So just always state the original grade. And finally, this is a fantastic section to put awards. So if you were on the Dean's List, if you received the class medal, if you were the top 2% of the class, etc., because it's right at the top of the CV in the case of the full-time MBA, it's a very good place to very quickly show, what an excellent student you were. So in terms of the work experience section, this is probably the main body of the CV is describing the companies that you worked for and the job functions that you did. Generally, you would state the name of the company, and what I really recommend, if it's a not household name, so no need to do it for Nestle or for Procter & Gamble, because everybody knows who they are, but you might have worked for probably the top company in your home country. It's a very good idea to give an overview of what that company was in maximum 2 lines. And I'll give you an example of that. But basically what it should describe is, the activity of this company, manufacturer of X with turnover and number of employees, because it very quickly gives a recruiter an idea of the size of the company and the position in the marketplace in which it was. When it comes to the job function, we would also recommend you to do a very similar thing, also your scope of work. People have exactly the same job titles, but it means very different things in different companies. So if you can just give them in a couple of lines, or maximum 3 lines, what that scope of work was, again, it facilitates a recruiter being able to understand exactly your level of responsibility. So, what your main responsibilities were, maybe what responsibility you had over budget, how many people reported to you, and who you reported to. That gives the recruiter a very clear idea of what position you had within the company and what level of responsibility you had. And then after that, you start listing the bullet points of your achievements. Now, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is actually a real example. I've, in fact, changed some of the figures to protect the confidentiality, but it's an example from one of our students. So, he worked for Roshan, which is not a household name, but it's actually the largest telecom company in Afghanistan. So in a couple of lines, he states, who is Roshan? So it's a leading telecommunications provider and market leader, how many active subscribers they had, what turnover they had, and how many employees you had. So, very quickly, the recruiter can get an idea of who Roshan is. The student who did the CV, he had been a sales director, and he'd had a bit of career progression. So he started off as a regional sales manager, and then he became the sales director for the whole operation. So again, he's giving a scope of work, so responsible for countrywide sales, reporting directly to the CEO, and managing a team of 16 people, including 7 regional sales managers. So in a nutshell, it gives the recruiter a very clear idea what his level of responsibility was. And below that, he lists the bullet points with all his key achievements. So he states what the responsibility was, and then what were the key things that he did in his role as a sales director.